brief warm up for us as we focus on these other data types. These, what I'm calling intermediate data types or container data types, the list in the dictionary. So let's focus on these some more. All right, so we're done with our data types matching game. We're going to go into about like a 20-minute session where I'm just going to tell you all the things we can do with the list, all the common things that we'll do with the dictionary. So this might be a little dry, but then we'll put this into practice in about 20 or 25 minutes as we work on the groceries exercise. So at this time, I'd like to turn your attention back into our in-class cheat sheet. And if you are keeping your own cheat sheet, feel free to bring it up. We'll make some more notes now. Otherwise, if you'd like to just reference our in-class cheat sheet that I'm keeping, here's the link. And so let's focus on this. And I'll just kind of point out the most important things that we'll do with the list object and the dictionary object or data type. So I'm just going to make another section at the bottom. I'll call it container data types, and we'll just work from there. But we recall that when we were dealing with data types, we did already use this type function to detect, well, what data type is something. We had been working with strings, textual messages inside quotes, and we have been working with numbers and Booleans. We even introduced the none type, which is used less frequently. But today we're going to focus more on the dictionary, which has key value pairs, and the list. So I'm going to make another section at the bottom. And we'll call this container data types. And we'll start with, probably the dictionary might be, I don't know, we'll start with the list maybe, and then we'll do the dictionary. Or maybe the other way around. Yeah, we'll do the list first. Okay. So. You know that we can have a list of numbers, we can have a list of strings, or a list of other lists. So let's just start with like a list of strings, maybe like our favorite flavors. These will be some ice cream flavors. Let's see, did we have these ice cream flavors somewhere? Yeah. Let's revisit these ice cream flavors. All right. So here we have a list. I'm just calling it flavors. How many items are in this list? Volunteer? Yeah, 3, right. Vanilla bean is 1, chocolate is 2, strawberry is 3. Okay, cool. So, I guess how could we answer that question in Python? How many items are in a list? There is a function that we could use for this. We'll talk about it in a sec. But before we do, let's get this flavors variable in the Colab notebook's memory. So we'll have to run this cell. Also, maybe just print what data type is our flavors variable, and maybe we'll just print the flavors variable just for good measure. All right, we see explicitly this is a list. Anything we pass into the type function will tell us what data type we're working with. When you see an error, if you're dealing with a nested structure, confirm what data type you're working with. It may lead you to a solution to get past your error. So all the things that we're about to do with this flavors variable is only because this is a list data type. Remember, when we were contrasting numeric versus string data and using the plus sign, we saw how the plus sign operator operates differently on numeric data, where it performs addition, versus string data, where it performs a concatenation or joining strings together. So we talked about the importance of first knowing what data type we're working with. Once we know what data type we're working with, we now know everything we can do with that data type. Or I guess after today, we'll know all the things we could do with the list data type. So there is a built-in function in Python that allows us to count the number of items in any list. Does anyone know what that function is? LEN, yeah. So we can invoke the LEN function, pass in our list of flavors. LEN, like length, what is the length or size of this list? Here we see it's 3. We would normally probably print this out, but this is the only thing in the cell, so I'm just putting it at the bottom and we see the results. So one important note about how to count items in a list is we just pass it into the LEN function. All right, and that's one of the popular things that we'll do with a list. How many items are inside? Counting items in a list. All right, so we can print out this entire list, but what if we wanted to reference just one of these values at a time? If we wanted to pick out just vanilla bean, or just chocolate, or just strawberry, there has to be a way of doing that. So I'm going to show you how to access any item in a list. Access any item in a list by its numeric position. List index starts at 0 in programming instead of 1. So what I mean by this is like this. Sure, we could print the entire flavors variable, but what if we just wanted to work with one of these flavors, like vanilla bean? Maybe we'll say like VB equals, and now how do we access this? We'll reference the name of the list, flavors, and now here we want just part of this flavors list. So we'll use square brackets to access some part of it. And inside the square brackets, we'll say, well, which item do we want? And we'll specify its numeric position. In this case, we'll start at 0, because that's the way it works in programming. 0 gets us the first item, vanilla bean. So now let's just like print VB. All right. So if we have a list, we can access any item by using square brackets on the right of the list variable and then passing into the square brackets. Well, which item? I love a volunteer. How could we access chocolate? Quick extension of what we just learned. Yeah.
You make a variable, like C, for example,
Yep.
and you set it to flavors and bracket.
Yeah, flavors 1, that will work. Print, see? So here we have item 0 is the first item, vanilla bean. Item with index 1 is the second item, chocolate. All right, another volunteer. How can we access strawberry from here? Hopefully not too hard. Let's just finish this up. Yeah. Flavors 2 will be our strawberry. Cool. All right, so hopefully you get the point. We can access any item in the list by using square brackets and then the numeric position. All right, awesome. So now if we extend this a little bit, what if we say print flavors 5? What are we going to see there? Thoughts? We want the 5th item, or we want the 6th item actually from this list of flavors. Yeah, there isn't 6 items, so we should expect an error back. So let's see, print flavors 5. No, there is no. We'll see an index error here. Here, let me move this to its own cell. Sure, we have flavors 0, flavors 1, flavors 2. Do we have flavors 5? Nope, there aren't that many items in this list. So whenever you see an index error, it means you're trying to reference some item in the list, but maybe there aren't that many items. Good to know, good to know. It might help if you see an index error. Now you know what it's talking about. All right, before we leave this, just a heads up, What if we wanted to access the last item in the list, no matter how many items there are? If we suppose this list of flavors could change in size at any time, like we can add more items to it later, perhaps, how could we dynamically take the last item in the list? In Python, we'll use a negative number for this. So let's try this out. Flavors, -1 will actually get us the last item in the list. And -2 would give us the second to last item in the list. So just a heads up about that, that you might be able to access items at the end of the list if that's helpful. Okay. And why this might be helpful is we can actually add items to a list. So we'll revisit this operation in a lot more detail next class. We can add an item to the end of a list. And the way that we'll do that is by using a method called append. So if we say print flavors, we'll see we start with 3 flavors. But we can add an item to our flavors list by saying the name of the list, in this case, flavors, .append. Append is a method that we can invoke on any list. Here, flavors is a list, so we can invoke this append method on it. And what do we want to append or add to the end of the list? I'd love to hear someone's favorite ice cream flavor. Quick fun volunteer here, you can shout it out.
Mint chocolate.
You got it, mint chalk, let's do it. So let's try to add this string, mint chalk chip. This is what's known as a mutating operation. In other words, it changes the underlying list variable in place. So after we run this line, the flavors variable will be different than it was before. And now when we print flavors, we'll see that there's 4 of them. And now when we access the last, we'll see dynamically mint chocolate chip. Okay, so append. We'll revisit that a lot more next class. It will be the basis for a few operations that we'll perform with lists called filtering and mapping, but we'll get to those in a sec. Can you add multiple things at once? Let's see how we would do that. Based on your question, how could we add multiple items to a list? We would either need to do 2 separate appends, as you would imagine, or let me see. I think we could do something like this, like flavors plus some other lists, like anybody have some more flavors we could use here, like pistachio? I don't know how to spell that. And something else like coffee. Awesome, thanks. Let's see if we could add these items to the list. Yeah, so I guess we can add 2 lists together and they will add multiple items. Yeah.
That's a question about that dot append. So
Yeah.
after you run that, is it just adding like an additional one?
Exactly. So if we run this append method multiple times, we will have multiple mint chocolate chips. Yes. What we could do is just introduce an if statement. Like conditionally add an item to the list. Here we could use our inclusion operator. If let's say like X equals, I don't know, some other flavor like, I don't know. What did you say? Caramel? Thanks. Caramel. If X is in our flavors list, or I guess if it's not in, then and only then will we add it. Flavors.append X. We're getting a little bit into some stuff we'll do next class. But the point is, after we now print flavors, we can run this many times and it won't add duplicate caramel. Right now, we only see one caramel, but only if caramel is not in our flavors are we now reaching this line that actually appends caramel. So this would be a safe way of ensuring caramel is in the list without adding it multiple times. I love that question. That's awesome. We'll actually get into this a little bit in our groceries exercise. So we're getting a little bit into some advanced topics, but you can see this is just a natural extension of how we already know how to use an if statement. Now we're thinking about reasons to use it that will help us do things. All right, so this is conditionally adding an item to the list. Only if this condition is reached. Here we're using not in operators that we took a look at already with the list data type. So we kind of took a look at those already. All right. So the thing about going back to test questions about how to add multiple items to a list, this actually is not mutating. So if we print flavors, it won't have pistachio and coffee in it permanently. So what we'll need to do is actually override this variable. We'll say flavors equals flavors plus this. Now, when we print our flavors, that will actually overwrite the underlying variable. So again, don't be confused about this. We're just doing something like x equals 2, and then x equals x plus 10, and then print x. Here we have 12. So we can work with a variable and overwrite itself, and that's all good. Basically what Python does here is it says, all right, I see you're trying to do some variable assignment. Let's start on the right-hand side. Okay, 12. All right, now we'll assign 12 to x, and so it's all good. What this is not asking is like, is x equal to itself plus 10? We need the double equal sign for that. So this is just using the same variable in assignment. And so a shorthand for this is actually saying x plus equals 10. And now we'll print x and we'll see 22. So plus equals is just a shorthand way of saying this variable equals itself plus something. And so surely we could do the same thing with this flavors variable. We could do it the long way, flavors equals flavors plus this other list, or we can just say flavors plus equal. So you might see that sometime. And we see, hello, pistachio and coffee in here. Cool. All right, so and I'm just kind of riffing on some questions that we got there, but that's, I think, the most common things that we'll do with a list. The last thing that I want to talk to you about is how we could loop through a list and access each item one at a time. But for every item, loop through a list and access each item one at a time. So here we have our flavors. And we know we can access the entire list of flavors. That's all good. We know from what we just did, we can access a single item from this list by using square brackets and then like the numeric position like 0 or 1 or 2. But how could we access each item dynamically for whatever items are in this list? I'd like to introduce to you the concept of a loop. In Python, in order to do a loop, we have a special kind of construction using the word for. So we say for some item, I'm just using a placeholder here. In our existing list of items, colon, enter, indent, do something with that item. So this is the for loop syntax. Another way of thinking about this is like this. For some item in our existing list of items, do something with that item. That's how I think about what a loop is doing. We just have to fill in the slots, but there's an order that we could do this. So if we want to loop through our flavors list, we have to put it in the second slot. We have no choice. Like for something in, we have to use flavors here. We have no choice. Flavors is our existing list. It goes in the position after the in. So whenever you want to loop through something, set up a for loop. You can even use some blanks to get you started and know that the list you want to loop through goes in the second slot after the in. Now we can work backwards. As we're looping through each item in this list, we'll choose a variable name to refer to each item within the passing of the list. So we have an ultimate choice about what to put in this first slot. You can call it whatever you want, whether you want to call it X or Y or flavor singular or F or item. You get to totally choose what to put in the first slot. But whatever you choose, that's the variable name we'll have to reference from inside the scope of the loop. So what I mean is like this, for F in flavors, if we do that, we'll have to print F. Also, I'm just going to print some kind of visual separator, and we'll see that whatever code is inside the scope of the loop will be executed with each passing of the loop. Let's see what this does, and then we'll talk through it and try to figure out what's going on here. All right, we have a list of flavors. We want to loop through them and access them one at a time. So we use flavors in the second slot. We can choose what to call each flavor in the first slot. Whatever we call each flavor in the first slot, that's the variable we'll reference inside the scope of the loop. So the way this goes is like this. Python is like, oh, you want to do a for loop? Okay, sounds good. What list do you want to loop through? Let's go to the second slot. Flavors. Okay, there's some items there. It's a list. All right, cool. What's the first item in that list? Vanilla bean. All right, let's assign vanilla bean to the variable F and do whatever you're telling me to do inside the loop. Here we're just printing some hard-coded string and we see it here. Then we're printing F. At this time, F is vanilla bean. Cool. So we see hard-coded line and vanilla bean. Now there's nothing else happening inside the scope of our loop. So nothing else happening here. So we reach the end of our inside of the scope of the loop, and now the loop just repeats. So Python's like, all right, we're still in a for loop. We finished processing the first item. Now let's move to the second item, chocolate. Okay, let's store chocolate in the variable F and do whatever you said inside. Print this hard-coded string and then print chocolate. And that's what we see here, and so on through the loop. Any questions about looping so far? Kind of weird, very powerful, and very important to kind of get comfortable with. All right. So I just want to show you that this variable here, F, you can choose whatever you want. And it kind of is weird to get used to. F doesn't refer to anything above or below the loop. F is our own variable that we're choosing to call each item in the loop. So equivalently, for F in flavors, print F. Equivalently, we could say something like for item in flavors. And if we do this, how will we need to change the inside of this loop? If we choose item as our first slot, yeah, exactly. If we're choosing to call each item the variable item, then we need to reference that same variable inside the scope of the loop. If you want to use item as your variable name, if that helps you remember, oh, we're using each single specific item, then choose item as your variable name. It's all good. What you'll see professionals do sometimes is if we have a variable called flavors, plural, maybe we'll call each one flavor singular. And so I'll do this less often in a beginner class because I don't want you to get confused between flavor singular and flavor plural, but this is how pros would probably do this. We have a list of flavors, plural. When we're looping through each one, we can call that a flavor and then print flavor, and that's all good. So the point is we get to choose what to call each item, and then we just need to reference that inside. Also, we have no choice what to put in the second slot. It's whatever list we're trying to loop through. All right, I think I belabored this point a lot. Other questions about lists and looping before we move on? Yeah.
Is there a way to delete an item?
Yeah. So another question about deleting items in a list before we get to looping, I guess. Here we talked about adding items, adding multiple items. Let's just talk about deleting items here. Removing items from a list. There's multiple ways of doing this. Like if you know the index of the item, you can remove it by its index, but the way that I think the way that I'm most common with is we'll use the DEL method, and then we'll say like DEL flavors and then some kind of index. I guess if we want to remove the duplicate pistachio, we can give like a -2 here. Or just a simple example, actually, letters equals a list of A, comma, B, comma, C. We can say delete letters 0, for example, and it would delete A from the letters. And now when we print letters, this is mutating as well. So it changes the letters variable in place. So here we'll start with 3 letters, and then we'll delete 1, and we'll see there's only 2 left. Cool. Just to answer that question about how to remove items from a list. We use the DEL keyword, but there might be other ways to do it if you know the index of the item you want or its value. So there might be other methods to do. All right. So we talked about lists a little bit. The most common things that we'll do with lists are A, count the number of items using the len function. We'll pass that list into the len function. And B, looping through the list. Next class, we're going to do a lot more looping. We'll get more comfortable with looping, and we'll use looping as the basis for doing some more complex operations with a list. But before we get into all that, let's just talk about dictionaries very quickly. So